thanks for all showing up. Let's do this.
Welcome everyone to this fifth workshop of the Brightfields Academy. We will give other folks 2 to 3 minutes to join this meeting. While we are waiting for them, we will do our annotation questions. Just a reminder to everyone who have not done annotation before using Zoom, there are 2 ways that you can do annotation depending on your version of Zoom. One is you will find a icon of a pen on the left side of your screen. You click it and you will find a stem option like I circled here. The other option is when you look at the top of your screen, there's a green rectangular with the text of your viewing Jubing's screen. And next to it, there's a view options. You click it and you'll find the annotation option there. Feel free to try it. And if you have questions, feel free to leave in the chat. Tansy and Matthew will help me to keep an eye on it and to help answer questions regarding annotation. All right, so our first question, I'm going to clean this. If federal funding were a recipe, how confident are you as a chef? Maybe you are the cooking class participant. Maybe you are the taste tester, sous chef, or you are the master chef. Please use the annotation feature of Zoom to pick one of these options. Thank you, everyone who have already participated. For the timeout's sake, I'm going to save this and move to the next one. The next and the last annotation question before we get started for the workshop. If tax credits for redevelopment of your brownfields were a recipe, how confident are you as a chef? I know many of you participated in at least one of the Brightfields Academy workshops in the past 3 months. So you might remember we talked about multiple times about the investment tax credits that are good resource for your Brightfields project. 15 more seconds and we will get started with our workshop today. Okay. Thank you everyone who have participated in this. All right. Welcome again, everyone, to this fifth workshop of the Brightfields Academy, which is also the last workshop of this. Thank you so much for everyone who have joined us so far. For those of you who joined us the first time, welcome. And here are our full group from the RMI side and KSU TAB side. Now I'm going to transition to Maggie to introduce KSU TAB. Maggie, please take it.
Everyone, I'm Maggie Bellinger with the K-State Technical Assistance to Brownfield program, or otherwise known as TAB. TAB is a nationally funded program through the US EPA Brownfields program with the goal of providing technical assistance to community and tribes that are undergoing economic redevelopment, community revitalization through that brownfields lens. Since we are funded through the federal government, all the services that we provide to communities and tribes are free, and we really try to tailor whatever those services are to meet the specific need or request of the community. Currently, there are 5 TAB providers all across, providing support all across the U.S. At Kansas State University, we provide assistance to communities in EPA's regions 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then there are other TAB providers as listed here that provide support kind of on the East and West Coast. KSU also is the national tribal TAB provider. So we support tribal entities all across the U.S. And I will pass it back to Shubi.
Thank you, Maggie, for introducing KSU TAB. I will briefly introduce my organization, Rocky Mountain Institute. We are an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on energy transition. We have a history of 40 years, and we have working with lots of entities, including local governments, other types of nonprofits, and businesses on various topics relevant to energy transition. A couple of virtual workshop ground rules, and please put in Zoom chats if you don't agree with this. Number 1 is we hope you can be present with us. Close other apps if possible, and please limit your distractions as if we were in a in-person workshop. And during discussion or activities, please keep your video on if possible. Also, please keep ourselves muted during presentation and when other people are speaking to leave space for them. And this is a learning environment, so please embrace it. One note I want to say is this is not a sales environment. All violators will be removed. All right. So just a quick overview of the Brightfields Academy. We started this journey in September, and then we learned about how to evaluate your brownfield site feasibility for clean energy reuse. In the 3rd and 4th workshop, we talk about how to integrate Brightfields into your EPA Brownfields grant application before the application deadline this year. I know some of you submitted the application, great work. And this is the last workshop to introduce other funding and financing opportunities for your Brightfields project. So for this specific workshop, our objectives are twofold. Number 1 is to learn about a wide range of available resources for your Brightfields project. Number 2 is to understand what are the relevant project stacking strategies for your projects, especially given we have expanded opportunities of tax credits and other new programs. Here's the agenda for today. After the introduction and the check-in question, we will talk about how to do the stacking of Brightfields projects on a high level, and then we will deep dive into the tax credits. We will talk about grant and bridge financing options. We will show you 3 examples of renewable energy project stacking, specifically on brownfields. Then we will provide a wide range of resources for your projects to move forward. Then we will wrap up the whole series of Brightfields Academy. Anyone has any questions before we get started? All right. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, feel free to put them in the Zoom chat. To kick off today's workshop, we will start with a quick check-in activity to get you thinking about your Brightfields projects. You don't need to report anything at this stage. So the first thing, if you can help me to do, is please find a notepad or whatever you want to use to write down your thoughts. Maybe you want to open a document on your laptop. First, write down or think about and write down a site that you are considering for a possible Brightfields project. It doesn't matter how advanced your planning is. Maybe you're super advanced, that you are reaching the stage of doing procurement. Maybe you just have this site sitting quietly for a couple of decades and you have not thought about how to reuse it. Just write it down, these sites, and answer 3 questions by yourself. Sorry, not 2 questions. You remember in the first workshop, we talked about the benefits of Brightfields projects. And then in the second workshop, where we talk about how to pre-screen your projects, where we mentioned it's very important to align your projects with the community benefits you want to achieve. So the first question I want you to think about and write it down is, what is your early hypothesis for how you think your organization will pay for this project? Let's take 20 more seconds to write things down. It is okay if you have not thought about that. That's why we are here today. Okay, I'm gonna advance to the second question. What do you hope to learn today in this workshop? Remember, I showed you all the agenda and objectives of today's workshop. And what do you hope to learn today? We will use this activity as a foundation for the discussion throughout this workshop. Right, thank you, everyone. Please keep that paper with you because we will use it later. To set the stage for today's discussion, I will now hand it over to Matthew, and he will provide some context on the evolving federal landscape and its implications for the programs we will explore today. Matthew, take it away.
Thanks, Jibing. Really appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you all here today. We're going to cover a lot today, and that'll be on both the resource side of things and the strategy side of things. And so I hope you're ready and buckled up for a good ride. There will be a lot of programs that we discussed today, most of which will be federal. And we wanted to just acknowledge some of the uncertainty in the federal landscape up front and let that kind of inform the rest of the discussion here. So the first thing, probably to no surprise to many folks attending, but many federal programs that we do discuss today face uncertain futures in part or in full and may be at risk. We're going to work with the facts as we know them right now and not speculate on the future of some of the programs here. But we do want to note that many were also created or renewed with bipartisan support, such as the US EPA's Brownfields program and IRS clean energy tax credits. So just wanted to note some of that up front. While we move forward with this, we're going to have asterisks throughout this slide deck next to the programs that we mentioned today that may be less likely to continue in their current form going forward. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll disappear, but they might face some changes. We thought adding an asterisk would allow us to kind of continue to proceed with the workshop smoothly but allow kind of each person to be aware that the program that you might be interested in might face some changes that you might want to look into as the next couple of years of your project move forward. Accordingly, the workshop today will focus both on what resources exist and how to strategically stack resources for clean energy projects. So again, we'll talk about a range of resources in a non-exhaustive sense, as well as the strategies for how to stack projects for stack resources, excuse me, for clean energy projects. And last but certainly not least, just want to note up front, and we'll wrap up today talking about some of the technical assistance that we can offer with Kansas State University TAB going forward after the academy is over. But as if you have projects that advance into 2025, just know that we're here to help you understand how to plan for these and navigate evolving federal programs and what to know about them as programs change, if they do. So just know that we're here as a resource to help you navigate not just the brownfields and the clean energy portions of this, but also the resource component of it, as that is absolutely necessary to making these projects happen. So thanks for indulging us with this. Just wanted to make sure that we covered this and addressed some upfront questions and concerns and uncertainty. With that, we're going to go ahead and move into our first section today, which is really on the overall strategy of project stacking for clean energy projects on brownfields. So when we are talking about the Brightfields resource stack, I want to just walk through what we actually mean by that. In part, you've probably heard of the terms stacking, braiding, blending, mixing. I don't know. You've probably heard a whole range of different terms out there. From our perspective here, they all ultimately refer to a similar practice, right? It's using multiple resources to make a project happen. There's also a term called leveraging. I would distinguish that personally as being meaningfully different from stacking or blending or braiding or whatever term you like to use. Leveraging from our perspective, and as we use it today, or if we use it today, it refers to using some funding to capture or secure additional resources as well. So using one grant as leverage for another, or one loan or tax credit as leverage for another, different from building up. So just wanted to clarify this. If you like the term braiding, feel free to use it. We're going to use the term stacking throughout this workshop. Just know that we basically mean the same thing as braiding or blending or mixing it into a bowl and baking it in the oven, whatever term you prefer here. So just to get us oriented here, noting that for most clean energy tax credits, or for most clean energy projects, excuse me, the tax credits will be the base of your stack, even for tax exempt entities. Eligible recipients do not need to compete for most tax credits, and depending on the project, they can offset somewhere between 30 to 70% of project costs for the clean energy portion of the project. Even the most ideal project will need funding beyond tax credits, most likely. Grants can address more tailored needs, unique innovations, and other project attributes, and that would fill in, more of your stack here. We'll talk about what some of those components could be as we continue with the workshop. In addition, tax credits and grants may offset total costs and may also require additional financing, such as loans or other debt financing or borrowing, to fill in gaps to get projects moving forward. Good news is that can help solve some of those gaps in projects, offsetting the total costs and bringing us down. Uh-oh, how are we going to do the rest of this? Let's see if the mayor left some change between the sofa cushions. There we go. There's the full project. Wonderful. Don't worry, we're not going to make you play Tetris today, but wanted to use that as a fun little analogy here as we get going. Because ultimately what you are trying to do is begin your stack and fill in the gaps, right? This is truly the name of the game. So when we're looking at this, we're thinking largely about tax credits, grants, and loans or other types of debt products. In addition, we actually think that technical assistance, not to be biased towards ourselves, but we think that that can be also part of your stack to the extent that that can inform a market study or a consultant or fund expert advice that can help you move your project along faster and build that up and as part of the overall value proposition of your project. The main thing I also want to introduce here when we're talking about financing and funding clean energy projects. Um, when you're setting up your project, these investments, it's important to understand how the clean energy infrastructure investments are typically set up to inform the resource stack. So what I mean by this is typically for an energy project, if you're an energy buyer, a municipality, a university, a hospital system, a private entity, whatever your energy buying status is, typically your relationship is you pay your utility, they send you electricity. It's a one-to-one, you pay your bill, and you get electricity there. Fundamentally, clean energy projects are actually an upfront capital investment. And so what that looks like here is that suddenly some of that money is going to an energy developer in exchange for that power. And I'll just note up front that there are a range of different types of ownership models and payment models out there. This is just one representative model. But unlike other infrastructure projects, and this is really important to understand, clean energy projects can actually displace some of the operating expenses for electricity, right? So it's a capital project that is displacing some operating expenses down the road, right? So we have full expenses there, reduced expenses, sometimes fully offset, depending on the size of your project. And so when you're building and financing clean energy projects, a key goal here is to achieve a reasonable market price for the energy buyer. And what that means is that ultimately your resource stack does not have to cover 100% of project costs necessarily. Creative funding and financing can be helpful in alleviating any premium costs for a competitive project. You're basically trying to set up an energy project that is at market parity with what the other project or what your other expenses were. So fundamentally, when you're trying to get a project online, that's the kind of North Star that you're aiming for. If someone wants to fund it 100%, you can, but typically you're trying to get it to the point where you are also paying for that energy at a level that you as the energy buyer or whoever you're leasing your project to is able to pay for it. This can get complicated quickly. It varies in different energy markets and different state regulatory schematics. I wanted to this is the overall concept of how to think about this when you're building your project stack. For questions on your specific market, we are happy to take that beyond this workshop and have conversations with you to help you better understand that and your specific situation. So at this point, I am going ahead and pass it over to Tansy to take us through a little bit more of a deeper dive on the tax credit formation and foundation of our Brightfield stack. Tansy, floor is yours.
Thank you, Matthew. Hi, everyone. My name's Tansy Massey Green. I've seen many of you on the former workshops, but if it's your first time joining, I'm a senior associate at RMI. And as Matthew teed up, I'm going to talk about the different tax credits that are available to be the foundation of your Brightfield stack. Going back to this Tetris metaphor, this is going to be the base blocks of your stack here. So there are two tax credits that have been the primary economic drivers for clean energy projects over the past decade that were extended in 2022 until 2035. Those two tax credits are the production tax credit, which is a 10-year credit based on the energy produced by the project. And then there's the investment tax credit, which is an upfront credit on the project's full eligible cost basis. So these have always been driving clean energy production in the country, but there are some significant changes that happened in 2022 that make them even more attractive for clean energy development than ever before. We're going to today focus on the investment tax credit, which provides that upfront credit for installing qualifying clean energy and storage projects. And we're focusing on this one because in our TA, in our experience, a lot of you are probably going to choose this option, the investment tax credit, over the production tax credit. But when you're looking to install solar or wind or any clean energy technology, you should definitely think about which is going to yield the best return for you and your project. So the investment tax credit is applicable to solar, wind, batteries, geothermal, and more. It is a 30% base tax credit with bonus adders, and we'll talk about what those bonus adders are. and it's available at the current rate until 2032. And it applies to total cost of installation, which includes supply and labor. Today, to talk about the investment tax credit, we'll use a case study here to guide the conversation. So, the city of Pawnee, Indiana, is looking to build a community solar park on an abandoned city dump. Here are the facts that we're going to go with for this case study. The project is seeking to host a 4-megawatt community solar farm on a 30-acre unpermitted dump site in the state Brownfields program. This is estimated to be a $10 million project, and while the site is not in a low-income community, the municipal utility, Pawnee Power and Light, plans to serve a majority of low-income residents. And of course, our beloved Leslie Knope will be the project manager on this project because it is next to a park. So as I was saying, the tax credits now include adders that equal up to 70% of project costs and support an equitable energy transition. So there's that 30% base credit. That's the base investment tax credit that projects are eligible for if they meet prevailing wage requirements, which is basic wage that you're going to pay workers that work on the project, and you're going to also have apprentices working on the project. The first bonus is the domestic content bonus, and this means that your materials are sourced domestically, and this provides an extra 10% tax credit. There's then another 10% adder for energy communities, and this includes brownfields, coal communities, and other communities that have relied economically on fossil fuels. And then there are 2 additional adders that you can choose from if your project is going to benefit low-income communities or if it's going to be located in a low-income or tribal community. So you can choose that 20 or 10% based on if you're going to benefit or if you're located in a certain area. And the tax credits on the left that are not in this dotted line are credits you get automatically if you meet the requirements for the different base credits and the adders, whereas the 2 options in the dotted lines are adders that you must apply for. Brightfields projects are more likely going to qualify for the Energy Communities bonus because of the site involved and the communities in which they're located. So like I was saying on the last slide, if they're on a brownfield or if they're in a certain community, they're going to qualify for that extra 10% adder. This doesn't qualify for that's not the case for every single brownfield and not for landfills. So you'll want to really check that definition and make sure it adds up with your site if you're going for that extra 10% bonus. So unlike other adders, the low income bonus tax credit adders require an application. This is what I was starting to get at before. So there's these 2 options. Option 1 is if a project is located in a low income or tribal community, that's a 10% bonus adder. And these are only for projects that are less than 5 megawatts, and it's far from guaranteed. So in 2024, the program was oversubscribed 5 times what the IRS could allocate. So it's definitely something you're going to want to try to get, but it's not something that you should be banking on as you do this stack. Option 2 is projects that financially benefit low-income communities. It's a 20% bonus adder, again, only for projects less than 5 megawatts. And the majority of the project's financial benefits must go toward low-income households or tribal communities. And there's a priority given to additional selection criteria, which includes cities. So a lot of the folks on this call, if you're cities or other additional selection criteria as defined by the IRS, you have priority for this and you have really good odds of getting this 20% bonus adder. There are two maps to help you determine if you will automatically qualify for the energy community adder or if you're a priority applicant for the low income communities bonus adder. So there's this DOE map on the left, which is the energy community tax credit bonus map, that shows if you're automatically in an area that qualifies for that energy community bonus. However, there are sites like Brownfields that still qualify for that adder, which are not on the map. So it's a little bit of a wonky definition. And if you have any questions about that, we can certainly help, or you can go to the IRS's website to find the exact definition. On the right, there is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool that also shows if you're located in a low-income area as defined by, I think, EPA or IRS. So what does this look like for Pawnee's $10 million project? In its procurement, Pawnee will give more points to local installers like Ron Swanson's Very Good Son, who will source from U.S. manufacturers and pay prevailing wages. So that's going to get that 30% base investment tax credit with that prevailing wage requirement, and it's going to hit the 10% domestic content adder. The project is on an eligible brownfield site, so that's an extra 10% for the energy community bonus. And Pawnee's designing this as a 4 megawatt community solar, primarily serving low-income residents. But it's not going to assume it'll receive that extra 20% due to the IRS capacity limits. But that could be an extra 2 million there. And so therefore, Pawnee's tax credit stack could be as high as 70%, bringing the remaining upfront project cost to about 3 million. This all sounds great, but the city of Pawnee and its utilities are both tax-exempt entities. So how can they receive tax credits? Well, there's two project ownership options that allow for tax-exempt entities to capture tax credits for installing solar on a brownfield. The path you and your community choose may depend on the situation you're in. So the first option is direct pay, which is a new process that was created in 2022 by the Inflation Reduction Act. It allows tax-exempt entities like cities, counties, and tribes to get the equivalent via an IRS refund for the tax credit value. So the entire amount, that whole potentially 70% for Pawnee, could come in as a direct payment from the IRS. The benefits here are that you get that full credit value, even though you are a tax-exempt entity and you don't have to deal with the intermediaries, and there's simplified financing. So it opens pathways to direct project ownership. The other way, and many of you might be familiar with this for the time prior to direct pay, is third-party ownership. This is where a third party will install, own, and operate the infrastructure. The site owner will host the system on their property and either pay for the power as it is consumed, or they will lease the equipment. The third party claims the federal tax credit because they have tax liability and passes part of the credit to the tax-exempt entity according to the agreement. So you might see a lower PPA rate, or you might get a discount on some other on how the finances are worked out in another way. The benefits here are that you have a low upfront cost. So you'll have little to no upfront capital required, and this is often treated more like an operating expense. The expertise, a third-party manager will own, the owner will manage installation, operations, and maintenance. So the city or nonprofit doesn't have to worry about all of that. And then there's a range of financing options. The third-party entity could be a private entity or a nonprofit green bank. So just to give you an idea of the options out there for tax-exempt entities. And now, because of these incentives and direct pay, Pawnee is now able to significantly reduce their project costs from 10 million down to potentially 3 million and re-energize Pawnee. Should you decide to apply for direct pay, keep in mind that it is a new process and it requires due diligence, but it is not a lengthy grant application that you may not even win. So there's going to be a registration. You must register your project for which the tax credit will be claimed on an online portal with the IRS, and you have to get a unique registration number. I'll just really emphasize this one because it's going to be really important, um, going forward to really make sure entities get their projects in as early as possible so that they can get this unique registration number. Then there's an IRS filing, and this is due 4.5 months after the end of the taxable year with a potential for a 6-month extension if requested. And then there's going to be a refund where the IRS makes a payment after reviewing the tax filing, and this could be more than a year after the project is placed in service. And so if you follow all of these different processes and you do everything correctly, you are guaranteed the direct payment. So that's the really great thing about these tax credits. Because of the incentives as well as direct pay, this is just what I was saying, tax credits should be top of mind for your Brightfields project stack. They're non-competitive, these tax credits, besides that low income adder. They are stackable with other types of funding and financing, and they do not involve extended reporting, and they're available now on a rolling basis. With that, I'm going to pass it to Matthew to talk about grants and bridge financing.
Thanks, Tansy. That was a great dive into Pawnee's story and the tax credits and how those form the foundation of your stack. Before we shift to grants and bridge financing, I want to take a quick pause here and see if anyone has questions on the tax credits portion of that. We know that is particularly new for municipalities, tribes, and and other nonprofits in terms of how you might factor that in and into your strategy. So I just want to take a moment and give people a chance, if you have any questions, to feel free to type them into the chat or come off mute and just ask directly. I will hang out here for a moment because I'm very comfortable with silence.
Matthew, we have questions.
Yep, I'm looking at Vince's question right now. Thanks, Jubing. Yeah, Vince, great question here. So it sounds like you're asking kind of about the two different mechanisms here, the direct ownership approach and the third party ownership approach, in terms of how the tax credit gets captured. Yeah, thanks. So for the direct ownership approach, again, getting to for 100% of the credit, again, distinguishing between 100% of the eligible credit versus 100% of the project costs. Um, Tansy walked through how you get to 100% there. The other way that would work from the indirect or the third party approach here, I wouldn't say so much I mean, yes, it would be negotiable in the sense that that would be part of the agreement as to what price you're paying for power or for your lease structure, if you were getting into that type of an agreement. For many years, that was the main way clean energy projects were financed and contracted. So this is something that's fairly familiar to the industry. It's just not always a mechanism that's available to every entity in every state. So there's actually that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. But yes, in theory, that would be part of the pricing negotiation. So rather than say, hey, here's how much we're going to build the project for you, it's going to be here's how much you're going to pay for the power that we're going to sell you from the project, or for the equipment we're going to lease you that's going to generate the power, right? So that would be the negotiation there. It would be the monthly lease or the annual lease price or the PPA or power purchase agreement price, typically on a per kilowatt or megawatt hour basis. So that's where the negotiation would happen at the procurement or pricing stage. Hopefully that helps clarify that a little bit. Thanks for the question. Yeah, you're basically negotiating how much are you paying for an operating expense versus how much are you paying for the capital project. Great question from Vince to kick us off here. I'll pause for one more moment and see if there are any other questions that come in right now. If not, we'll have time for that in about 15 minutes. So keep your thinking caps on. Great. All right. We're going to move on to the next section here. Colleen, if you have to hop off, no problem. This is all being recorded as a reminder, and we'll send the slides and recording out so you can catch up on your own time after. We appreciate you joining us so far. So with that, we're going to go to the next part of this, which is really focusing on the grants and bridge financing beyond the tax credits here. This might be a more familiar topic to many of you who work in infrastructure, finance, and funding. So we're adding that next piece here in our stack. So ideally, after securing tax credits, regardless of the ownership structure that you choose, the next piece of this would be to look at what funding and financing that you might need to make this project a reality here. So just to clarify, I think most of you should be familiar with this, but sometimes this gets confusing. When we say funding, we refer to grants and cooperative agreements that do not need to be repaid. When we say financing, we mean borrowing, which does need to be repaid, typically with interest, though not always. So the quest for funding here will probably be the hardest part of assembling your funding stack. Again, when we're putting this Tetris puzzle together here, the more tax credits you can utilize, obviously, the less you'll need to rely on grants. But many funders can and are interested in supporting Brightfield projects or components of Brightfield projects, including the federal government, state governments, local philanthropy, and other funders. The important thing to note, some of you probably have direct experience here, some grants will fit together really nicely. Other grants are far less compatible. And just to keep in mind as a reminder for everyone here, a federal cost match usually can't be satisfied with another federal grant as well. So you can't use a federal grant as a cost share for another federal grant. That's one way where those grants don't always fit together nicely. Sometimes they fund different pieces of things and can't always overlap. Important to just understand what's eligible and what you can use that funding for. I'm going to pause for a second here. Jibin, let's throw up the poll question on funding stacking here. Would love to just get a pulse check on how people feel coming into this about your familiarity with resource stacking. So just take a quick look at this. You should see a poll question in the middle of your screen. Don't worry, we're not going to no awards or prizes or penalties based on your answer here. We're just trying to get a pulse check on the group here. Great. Let's go ahead and we can end that poll here. In short, it seems like a few of you, let's share the results. More than half are not very familiar with different resources and stacking incentives. So great. We're really glad you're here and we hope you learned something from this workshop. If you are more familiar, it's kind of a third of you are very familiar or somewhat familiar. Great. Also happy to have you here. Hopefully you can learn something that you can take back to your project or your planning process from this. But good to know that there's some experience here. We'll stop sharing and continue to move on. One way to approach this, and when I used to write grants for communities and help advise communities on how to navigate the federal grant and state grant process, one way to think about this is to simplify your search for funding and financing by really breaking down your project into manageable parts. Right? There's the old adage of how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. This is the same type of situation here. Right. So you could think of this in terms of project phases. Hey, we need money for planning, or we need money for construction or implementation, or design and engineering. Or you could look at the elements of your project. Maybe there's an energy storage component to your project that is different from the solar piece. Maybe there's a getting your site ready element of this that requires some site enhancements that specific funds could support. Or you're trying to add a workforce training component to your project, and that's just a specific type of use altogether, and you could get funding from a different agency or funder specifically for that workforce component, right? So understanding, hey, what parts of our project do we really have, and how can we work with that to attract funding from certain areas or be more competitive in certain spaces? We're not going to walk through all of the ranges of grants that exist, but I'm going to walk through a few different types of federal funding that exist on the kind of grant space. Congressionally directed spending is another form of federal funding, not necessarily a grant, though it often works that way. Um, they can support complex projects or, again, components of complex projects. Um, if you're not familiar with congressionally directed spending or community project funding, as it's called in the House of Representatives, it was formerly known as earmarks and can essentially support a large variety of different infrastructure, workforce, clean energy, community projects, depending on the priorities of the Congress and the representatives. This is appropriated through the federal budget process through requests from senators. That's congressionally directed spending. On the House of Representatives side, you can make similar requests called community project funding. The current rules have been less favorable to clean energy in recent years. So you can, my best advice here would be to discuss your project ideas or components of your project with your congressional delegation. Typically, the process would ramp up in Q1 of each year, with requests typically due to your congressional delegation by April. And then your congressional delegation works it through their own process and figures out which projects they want to move forward from there. So it's an interesting process. If you have a good relationship or are looking to build a relationship with your congressional delegation or a representative or senator in your delegation, could be a good opening for the conversation, figuring out what their process is and what their priorities are. Similarly, beyond the federal grants, or sometimes it is a federal grant at a regional level, if it's the Appalachian Regional Commission or some other regional commissions, there are regional grant programs that could contribute to your stack. So it may not be just from a national agency, such as EPA or DOE. It could also be through some of these regional entities. So don't hesitate if you are in some of these specific regions or in another one that is not listed here. Don't hesitate to look at what some of those programs could be and how they could support parts of your project. And then depending on the project structure, again, when we talk about direct ownership versus third-party ownership and some of the operating costs and how you'd finance that, Brightfields may also need bridge financing to complete the projects. Due to the high cost of major infrastructure projects here, it can be challenging to find funding for them entirely upfront. And that's where, even beyond tax credits and grants, there can be even a time lag between when the funding gets reimbursed and is secured or received by the applicable entity. So there can be multiple reasons why you'd want to be looking to bridge that financing gap. And you have some different options: state and federal loans, market-based loans, local revolving loan funds to the extent they can support reuse as well, and other local bonds or debt financing. Those are all options on the table. There may even be more classifications. This is just a representative sample. We're going to move on to one that is increasingly national in reach. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Elisa Peterson, to share a little bit more specifically on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF, and how that process is being set up in 2025. So, Elisa, take it away.
Thanks, Matthew. Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa Peterson. I'm a federal policy manager here at RMI, where I've been focused on the Inflation Reduction Act. I'll talk a little bit about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is $27 billion, making it the largest fund within the Inflation Reduction Act. It was split into three different kind of buckets. The first is the National Clean Investment Fund. This is $14 billion, and it was awarded to three different national nonprofits, with the largest amount of funding going to Climate United. This bucket of funding is largely used for financial assistance, so giving out loans for key projects. And the funding is with the at this point. We have seen some projects already start be awarded funding. Climate United already did at least one project. The next one is the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. This is $6 billion, and it's also awarded to national nonprofits. It was given out to 5 different national nonprofits. It's similarly designed to support financial assistance for projects, but the CCIA award was also kind of set up to try to build more green banks and community lenders across the US. So even though these are the 5 awardees, the plan is to give quite a few sub-awards. So just because you aren't aware of these 5 awardees doesn't mean that a local community nonprofit or community lender doesn't have funding from CCIA. And then finally, Solar for All. That's $7 billion. It was awarded to 60 different entities. Many of them are states, but there are some local nonprofits and some tribal governments. And this is the pot of funding that is available more specifically for solar projects. It does allow rebates, but also financial assistance and lending. So NCIF and CCIA, I would put into more similar categories. It provides financial assistance to qualified projects. So it's not going to be grants, but it does have very flexible financing. So for instance, if you are doing a loan, it could do a forgivable loan, which can look more like a grant. The NCIF and CCIA recipients are currently kind of putting together their financial offerings. Most of those financial offerings, they have some type of kind of thing on their website sharing what their strategy is for an investment. But the NCIF and CCIA recipient applications are on the EPA website, so you can kind of see which recipient might be best suited for serving your needs. And then for NCIF and CCIA, there are kind of like priority projects that they want to finance. I would say the Brightfields projects fits in this distributed energy generation and storage. Every recipient of NCIF and CCIA has said they're planning to finance distributed energy generation and storage projects. These are pretty wide in scope, so there's a little bit less requirements around what these projects need to look like. As long as they're solar projects, they should be eligible for financing, though different recipients might have different projects that they're trying to prioritize. The other category that I think is worth thinking about for these types of projects is Solar for All. The nice thing about this is it can give rebate funding in addition to loan funding. But it is a little bit more focused than the NCIF and CCIA projects. So these types of projects would need to be designed a little bit differently to be eligible for Solar for All. For instance, the Solar for All funding needs to go towards residential serving community solar. And it also needs to be really focused on low-income solar projects. So the nice thing is that there were 60 awards given out with Solar for All. You can see from this map that the awards really were pretty evenly distributed across the US. So every state should be covered by a Solar for All award. And on EPA's website, you can see which awards were given to which states. And so you could reach out to your Solar for All awardee to kind of understand what offerings they're providing. I will say Solar for All is a little bit behind NCIF and CCIA. They don't have their contracts signed or their funds available yet, and some of them are having a year-long planning period. So it would certainly be worthwhile to reach out to a Solar for All awardee within your jurisdiction, just to see if they have an offering provided, or potentially say, hey, we have Brightfield projects and we want Solar for All to serve them. Can you consider a financial offering there? They're in their kind of like planning stage, so it actually is a very good time to reach out. Okay, so that's Solar for All and GGRF. I think it's a very flexible pot of funding, and the money is just starting to flow, so this is definitely the right time to reach out to those recipients. With that, I will pass it back to Matthew.
Yeah, thanks so much, Elisa. I mean, GRF, we're going to follow this closely here. So if next year, as your project advances next year, as your planning process advances next year, and you have questions about kind of the latest status of, regional funders for yourself or national funders who you might be able to work with in that space, please don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to answer questions. We'll be following that program very closely. Ultimately, regardless of the funding or financing program you pursue here, ensure that you strategically align your local project goals with federal agency priorities. This is a very minor pro tip here in terms of kind of grant seeking and financing in general. But just remember that Brightfields address many goals. As we've talked about in prior workshops in the Brightfields Academy, certainly consider how reducing pollution, environmental justice, workforce development, technological innovation, or even just activating local economic investment could be part of the selling points for your project, and perhaps a priority for some funders when they're not looking necessarily at all of these checkboxes, but they're looking at a couple of them specifically. So keep in mind that the Brightfield projects do address many different goals. We're going to move on. We've talked about tax credits, grants, bridge financing here. We're going to give you some examples of renewable energy project stacking in general. But before that, I want to circle back to the check-in that Jubing led, where you all wrote down an initial hypothesis about how you might pay for your Brightfield project. So take out your notes there, or pull up that email draft that you opened to take some notes on your computer. And based on this overview of the strategic project stacking and the tax credits and bridge financing and grants that we just walked through, does your original hypothesis still make sense? What are you thinking about now that you weren't before, if anything? And admittedly, we've covered a lot of ground already. So what's a question that you have that you haven't asked yet? Feel free to answer them for yourself, or feel free to type into the chat here in the meeting. What's something you're thinking about that you weren't thinking about before? Or what's a question that you're still sitting on? And if you're in Mountain or Pacific time here and you're still thinking about lunch or haven't had lunch yet, that's okay to be thinking about here too.
I have a question for you all, if I can.
Yeah, jump in.
Awesome. Okay, so I am in the very initial stages. So I'm thinking about site acquisition right now, and finding the funding for site acquisition. And I'm curious if you all have an example of where states have found money specifically in state budgets, like if it's in the agriculture, like the public health, or like where in state budgets that folks have looked for. And then as an addition to that question, like what kind of public-private partnerships have you guys seen for brownfield sites that have been effective?
Okay, two good questions there. And you're in Minnesota, right?
Sorry. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself or over my skis here on the Minnesota budget process there. I might have to take that question offline in terms of where in the budget to find that specifically. But in terms of different public and private or public-private models, what you're describing sounds like it would be a private entity, or maybe it's a nonprofit entity, but it's not your entity that owns the site currently. And you'd be looking to own either the energy infrastructure or the entire site itself. The most common thing we'd see in this case would be something like a lease structure where the surface of the land would be leased, or the entire site would be leased to the entity that wants to develop the energy project on it, whether it's a direct ownership model or a third party ownership model. You'd still transfer at least the surface of the site for surface level development. That doesn't necessarily have to involve the transfer of ownership of the full site and potential environmental liabilities that go with that. So that could be one option to think about there. Likewise, we've seen that inverse happen where a public entity perhaps has a public or nonprofit entity actually owns the site and leases the surface of their landfill, or leases the surface of a brownfield site to an energy developer or another investor who wants to build a project on there. So those are some of the elements that you could look for in how you'd structure a public-private partnership here. If you start to get into more like kind of shared funding and financing, I'd want to better understand your circumstances before I just offer like carte blanche advice here. But it's a really good question, and I'm glad you guys are thinking about that. I see a question here from Rebecca, who normally takes the lead on coordinating all the financing. Oh, what a good question. GGRF is a new program, so that one's going to be kind of TBD on who's going to be actually kind of running the whole show there, other than the people who are managing the funds directly. Um, we're, but in general, for an energy project, the there are two ways that this could happen. For a direct ownership model, as we were talking about before, typically that would be the entity that is intending to own the infrastructure. So whoever is buying that, the energy buyer or the infrastructure buyer there in that case, would take the lead on figuring out the funding and financing, any debt financing that's necessary, and setting up the capital project as they would if they were building a building or a road. Um, in terms of the third party financing structure or the third party ownership structure, typically that would be the energy developer who would take the lead there. It doesn't have to be, and it could be a combination of both the contracting entity and the development entity. But typically they would work on securing the tax credits. They would work on kind of paying for the capital investment, and then again treating it as an operating uh, expense for the party that they're contracting with. So, Rebecca, again, it can vary based on the structure of the project there. And it can also vary based on the type of funding or financing program you're engaging with. Let's see. Steve, given the incoming. Elisa, Tansy, do either of you want to jump in on Rebecca or Luke's questions while I'm reading Steve's?
Oh, I was going to take a stab. I was about to write to Steve.
Oh, go for it.
I'll address that really quickly, that we are certainly investigating other financing options, and we definitely don't have an answer for you right now, but we can keep this group in the loop for when we do, have some solutions. We also really don't know what's going to happen. We know like what's at risk and what's at higher risk and what's at lower risk, but we really can't predict what's going to happen with the tax credits or the grants. But you bet we will be continuing to think about how to finance these clean energy projects going forward.
Yeah, good point, Tansy. I'll just add one more thing to that, Steve. Look, there are over 500 different Brightfields projects that have been built to date, that have been completed. And many of those were brought online, or majority of those actually were brought online kind of in the 2010s. And so a lot of the expanded tax credits that Tansy talked about earlier, some of the new financing programs or grant programs that we mentioned, didn't exist then. So there were other structures, there were other strategies. Sometimes it's, again, as we talked about, when you're thinking about the project, you're trying to think about how does it make sense in your energy market and what the current price you're paying for electricity is. So some of them were kind of pegged to or in relationship to markets where there are higher electricity prices. And it was more financially viable to bring on a new project in that kind of a market setting. There are some state incentives in at least 5 or 6 different states that specifically help these types of projects. And then there are other types of partnership structures and creative third-party structures that we could go down a completely different workshop rabbit hole if we wanted at some point to really walk through how those are set up. But just know that there are alternative funding structures and strategies. We are not only familiar with many, but actively also thinking about how we can creatively leverage kind of a piecemeal approach here in specific emerging markets as well. So it's a great question. It's definitely the question to be sitting with and asking over the next few months, if not years, as we explore an evolving federal landscape. And again, we're happy to be a partner and in your exploration of that to figure out what could make sense for your project. So thank you, Luke, Rebecca, Steve. Great questions there. Really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and move on. Steve, we might actually answer some of your questions with some of the case studies that we're going to walk through in brief here in terms of different structures. So I'll pass it over to Tansy, walk through the first 2 stacking examples, and then I'll wrap up the section.
Thanks. Yes, next slide here. Okay, a couple examples to start to think about how these different financing sources can stack together to make these projects a reality. First example is San Antonio invests 13 megawatts of solar across 42 city facilities, not Brightfields, with tax credits and strategic financing. So what this looks like for San Antonio is the investment tax credit, which is a 30 to 40% tax credit, and they're going to leverage direct pay here. This is going to cover $10 million. Then there's the state low interest loan. This is the $2.5 million loan from the state. And then they're going to cover the rest with municipal bonds covering $18.3 million. And just to put this into a pie graph, this is what that stack is going to look like, where pretty significant amount, this block here is going to be the investment tax credit, and the rest are going to be different types of loans. It's a $30.8 million investment, which will yield $7 to $11 million in net savings over 25 years. This project really did happen in the last year or 2. They just found the developer to work with them on it, and they're going to be leveraging direct pay as these sites slowly start to get installed across the 42 different facilities. Next example is in Washington, D.C. This project was completed in 2020, but we're going to pretend for this presentation that it was completed today when the IRA was implemented. So suppose Washington, D.C.'s 2.65 megawatt of community solar on a brownfield was completed in 2020, was built today. So they would have leveraged the 30% investment tax credit for $1.65 million, the energy community adder for another 10% at $0.55 million, the domestic content adder for $0.55 million, and then the low LMI community benefit project adder for the additional 20%, since this was a community solar project, and that's $1.1 million. And we're saying hypothetically that they would have gotten a GGRF forgivable loan that would have covered that extra $1.65 million. So here's what that stack is looking like. Most of that, the project costs are going to come from the investment tax credit and the bonuses, and then they have a forgivable loan to cover the extra amount. And so this $5.5 million project is saving 780 taxpayers about $500 per year for 15 years. DC did not benefit from all these different bonuses, but this is what the project would have looked like if it was implemented today. And Matthew, back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to take us from nonfiction to fiction here for a moment. We're gonna use Hogwarts to help educate us on another approach here. Let's say that they deployed 10 megawatts of a wind farm on a brownfield next to school grounds with a third-party financing agreement structure, and they leveraged some technical assistance as well to help pay for this $20 million project. the important things that we wanted to highlight here. So to the Vince's question earlier, here's a good example of a third-party agreement where this is paid over the 25-year contract. So that 19.725 million of this $20 million project is actually financed over 25 years. And Hogwarts would be paying for this on kind of a monthly or annual basis, depending on the nature of their agreement, through, in this case, a power purchase agreement structure. Um, Hogwarts was also very fortunate to leverage a grant from the Department of Underground Mysteries for a technical consultant here for 200K and other technical assistance for 75K that helped offset some of the project planning costs. So again, when we're thinking about the stack, even with a third-party ownership structure and a third-party financing structure, you can still have some grants or technical assistance and other loans that can help offset parts of the project cost and make this a reality. It's funny to say make this a reality when I'm talking about Hogwarts. So again, we look at the different types of pieces that come together here. And just the important thing to note, as we talked about before, in some energy markets, third-party financing agreements may be your best option. They aren't magic, unlike this case study. They're just another type of deal structure. And so again, you want to just evaluate what are your goals from the project? What are some of the constraints or market opportunities that you might have in terms of what types of agreements you can leverage and the capacity that your team has and eligibility that you have for a direct ownership approach versus a third-party ownership approach. The other thing to note from all of these case studies is that a stacking strategy, while it's focused on paying for the upfront project costs, should not neglect to consider the lifetime energy savings or the other operational costs and savings as part of the complete financial picture. So in both of the two case studies that Tansy referenced, right, we had energy savings that are resulting based on the current projections for both of those projects, net savings over the lifetime of the project. And so again, it's a different way to think about infrastructure projects when you bring in clean energy because you're displacing, as we talked about earlier in the workshop, you're displacing some of your other operating costs. And not just displacing, but perhaps doing that at a different rate, often lower or fixed, that you're less susceptible to market volatility in energy pricing from your utility or from your current energy provider. That can get complicated and does get complicated quickly. So we're introducing that piece of this into the whole stack because it's important when you're thinking about how do you plan for and project out a project. It's typically not done, and we wouldn't recommend doing it just as you would finance, say, like a new city hall or a new community center. Those are upfront projects there, upfront capital projects where you're not expecting an ROI in financial terms. So moving on here, I am going to pass this back to Tansy to walk us through some resources for moving forward.
Thank you. So our Brightfields roadmap is something that you all are going to receive in an email in the new year. It'll highlight resources to support 5 key areas to plan and implement Brightfields. We've developed this roadmap to help you identify funding resources for planning your projects, to help with brownfield site improvements, to help with workforce development, clean energy reuse, and energy storage reuse. So you'll see when you get the roadmap that there's all these different funding opportunities that we've identified that you can use for Brightfields projects. And you can use the roadmap to help you understand what you need to know to decide whether it's worth prioritizing and pursuing a specific project. So the roadmap will walk you through the purpose of the different funding opportunities, the funding available and the match required, the due date, what the timeline is, and any considerations that we think might be helpful that might help you decide whether or not to pursue the program or helpful tips specifically related to Brightfields. So we're going to send this all to you. You guys can all take a look at the different funding sources that we've specifically identified. This is federal funding opportunities. So hopefully this will be a good launching pad for as you develop your stack for your projects. And based on today's workshop, the roadmap can help you build your resource stack, just like the Tetris example that we saw at the very beginning, using those tax credits as the foundation, followed by grants, then loans, and then, of course, our technical assistance or other technical assistance. Our Afford tool is another resource that we went over in the last workshop, but as a friendly reminder, or if you missed the last workshop, we also have our Afford tool, which is our America's Federal Funding Opportunities and Resources for Decarbonization, that can help you streamline your search for relevant funding or updates beyond the funding roadmap. And so what the Afford tool looks like is there's 250 programs, federal funding programs that we've included in this tool, where you can sort through them, filter through them all, and see which funding sources are relevant for the specific program, or sorry, for the specific project you want to pursue and for your applicant type. So if you're a local government and you're looking for Brightfields projects and you only want competitive grants, you can find all of the different funding sources that specifically meet those criteria. So please go ahead and check that out as well as you're developing your stack. Matthew, back to you.
So I believe Maggie is going to take this one.
Sorry, this is Maggie. I'm going to pass it back to Maggie Bellinger from K-State.
All right, thanks everybody. So I'm just going to quickly cover some additional tab resources that can help you maneuver, brownfields to brightfields, or just maybe some other funding and technical assistant opportunities for you all. One of I'd say our main focus of the TAB programs is to just help communities, build capacity in whatever endeavor they're reaching for. Our ultimate goal is we want to empower communities to start making and realizing change through outreach, education, and engagement. We also have a plethora of tools and resources, as well as providing some one-on-one community or site-specific assistance. We like to say that we fill gaps to help overall projects. So if there's, a project in your community, a brownfields project, whether it's Brightfield, solar, or Brightfields, clean energy, something else, and you're struggling or you're stuck for whatever reason, reach out to KSU TAB or your other TAB provider, and we can help you hopefully get that project unstuck and get going on its way so you can reach your ultimate goal. This is just a list of some of our more common services. It by all means is not a comprehensive list. As I'll get to a little later, I mean, we're very open. As long as there's a brownfields tie and it will help you get to where you need to go, we're willing and able to help. We have a small staff here at Kansas State, but we also have a plethora of partners. Right now, we have a little over 40 partners in our partner network, and they vary across experiences and expertise. We have planners, we have, RMI as one of our partners where we're able to put on these Brightfield Academies and provide some one-on-one technical assistance to you guys going through these type of projects. So really anything that covers the gamut, we can usually find an expert or a resource for it to help you keep moving along. There we go. Some of our, I'd say, more common activities and where it may relate into Brightfield specifically is to assist local governments and communities with that community engagement piece. If you're trying to get out in the community and share some information or gather input or feedback on a particular project, brownfields redevelopment, a Brightfields project, and you're struggling or you're not sure how to engage the community or where to start, that's definitely one area that we can help with. And we have various different types of activities and events that we can do or ways to help you outreach within your own community. We also provide a lot of economic development support in the sense of feasibility studies. How feasible is it to convert this brownfield site to a Brightfield or a downtown property into something else? We do a lot of highest and best use market analysis or opportunities analysis that can complement some of the work RMI has been doing. We too can do resource funding roadmaps to help identify just various types of funding that might be out there to help you support your projects. As for those of you that were on maybe workshops 1 through 4, you know that we provide quite a bit of support and help for those of you applying for the EPA Brownfield grants every year. And we can even help with, marketing fact sheets, like the example here on the left of just putting information together so you can have that and hopefully attract developers or other people to get on board with your redevelopment project. This is just a very brief example of what an opportunity analysis looks like. We recently just conducted this one up in Roundup, Montana. And what that does is it just kind of takes a look at, the site or the project in relation to some demographics and what's going on in your community and can it support a particular reuse, or what assets or anchors do you have within your community that can help you reach your ultimate redevelopment goals. Outside of TAB and some of the resources that RMI listed, there are other state and federal brownfield programs that can provide support. You can get free phase 1 or phase 2 environmental site assessments from your state or region EPA program. So if you're looking at a site to, convert into Brightfields, but you need that environmental assessment done and you don't have the funds for that, definitely reach out to your state programs or EPA, or you can reach out to me and we can connect you with the appropriate folks. A lot of states have cleanup funds that you can apply for that aren't on that national competitive scale. Not all states offer that, but a lot of states do. So that's always an avenue to explore. Again, the EPA competitive grants that come out every fall. And then in addition to our TAB services, all EPA through their land revitalization program also offers technical assistance similar to along the lines that we do. And oftentimes a TAB, we will partner with the EPA land revitalization TA. So we may come in and say, or typically like they might do a market analysis and then we'll come in on the back end and do that initial community or follow on community engagement, do some renderings and things like that. So it's just kind of trying to find the right fit to fill the gap for that community need. And then I wanted to take just a couple moments to talk about some additional funding opportunities that are out there for brownfield projects, etc. These are some just more common ones that we have seen communities and other project partners go after to support their, community goals and efforts. The Department of Transportation, right now there's a Regional Infrastructure Accelerator Program grant. It closes next month. There's Rural and Tribal Assistance Pilot Program. That NOFO is due to come out sometime this month. So stay tuned if you're interested in that. And you can visit that link there on the webpage. It has a dashboard similar to what Tansy was showing, where you can actually go in and filter by like your type of project or your entity to really narrow down what type of funding might be available to support. Of course, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Commerce, and then there's always HUD funding that can help support certain projects as well. And then for those of you that may not have heard or are unsure about what this is, the EPA Environmental Justice Program, the Thriving Community Subgrants are out now for several regions. And what this does is it's through their grant maker program. And as an eligible entity, a local government, nonprofit, EJ, disadvantaged area, you are eligible to apply for grants falling within these different tiers. And essentially what the grant maker is, they are the grantee. So they are acting as a pass-through to get this money to communities to do, assessment type work, to do some planning work, to do redevelopment projects. And then the community itself is not responsible for, reporting to EPA and doing all those reporting requirements that a lot of people lack that capacity to be able to manage grant funds. So the Thriving Communities Grant Maker Opportunities provides a way to get money into these neighborhoods or your communities so you can actually do the work, but not have to, do the grant management piece of it. For regions 5, 6, 7, and 8, the regions that KSU supports, here are just some links to the grant makers for those specific regions. I know Region 5, they have not opened up their Thriving Communities grants yet. Region 7 and 8 are open, and I believe Region 6 is not yet open either, but keep checking back. As you can see here, a lot of the funding can be used for a lot of different things that other, I'd say, funding opportunities kind of in the federal world, and it, especially in brownfields, haven't really been utilized before. So it's a great opportunity to get some work done within your community. To request additional TAB assistance going forward, it's free. That's one of the best things about the TAB program. Even if we bring in a partner to support you or do some work, that's all funded through the TAB program, so it's no cost to you or your community. If you're interested in learning more, or you have a project or you have a need, you can just send us an email, send us, pick up the phone, give us a call. We set up an initial meeting to have a conversation about your needs, what the project is, make sure that it's within our wheelhouse to do, and then we agree on a course of action and get started. If for some reason it's determined that it's not really technical assistance under the TAB program, we will connect you or find other resources to help you continue that project work and get that project going on its way. All right,
So much,
back
Maggie.
to Matthew.
Yeah, thanks so much, Maggie. Look, our Brightfields Accelerator from the first day that it launched was a partnership with K-State TAB, and is part of a broader network of technical assistance. We're also partnered with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, CClear. I've actually known and worked with Maggie and the team there since 2016, even before I was at RMI. The services that Maggie was just talking about can be incredibly valuable at different stages of your project and depending on what you're trying to do. And the team there are wonderful partners to your two communities, municipalities, tribes, other nonprofits. So it's really been a pleasure to have not just a funding partner here, but also a technical partner that K-State and the KSU TAB team provide here. So cannot more highly recommend them for some of those resources. We've talked about this in prior Academy workshops, but just as a reminder, if this is your first one, our Brightfields technical assistance can help you move from idea to implementation. In fact, it's designed to do that. So we are here to help you identify promising opportunities if you're starting from square one. If you have a site that you want just a gut check on, we can also do a pre-screening to gut check that, or help you think about your reuse planning or utility engagement strategy. Obviously, funding and financing and resource stacking are elements of our TA, as you saw with this workshop today. And if you have any more specific community questions or state-specific questions or market-specific questions, please don't hesitate to follow up with us after this workshop. And then our goal is for most entities, we try to get to the competitive procurement process. And we have examples and specific support we can provide for RFQs, RFPs, other insights from the Brightfields market nationally or for your specific region to the extent applicable. Our goal is to make it as straightforward to request technical assistance for your project. It's free, just like because we're a partner to Kansas State University's Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. If you are in EPA Regions 5 through 10 or a tribe, we can work with you very easily and directly. If you aren't within one of those areas, let's have a conversation and figure out how we might be able to make that happen. There are other options, but they're just not as straightforward as if you're in those regions. What's the application process and contracting like? There was no application and no cost. So if you're interested, we typically just start with a scoping conversation to understand your needs and your project, and just whether your project's a good fit for what we can do and whether we're a good fit for you. It's that simple. And lastly, the scope of our services is flexible and varies by project, site, and community needs. Before we move on, I just want to throw up a quick final poll question here on resources for moving forward. So Jubing, let's go ahead and put that up. This should show up right in your screen. If our team could help you with one thing, wish list going into the holidays, what would you choose? So again, this doesn't mean you are necessarily calling on us to be your partner in crime for everything here. I'm just curious what you'd be most interested in if we could provide support. everything from site analysis, technology specs, stakeholder buy-in, funding, financing, or market engagement. Again, there is no wrong answer, and this doesn't commit you to having to deal with us further. Great. And then while you're filling out that poll question, just want to thank everyone. Maybe this was your first workshop, maybe you attended a few, maybe you attended all of them if you were a true returning customer here. This was a 5-part Brightfields Academy this fall. This is the 5th and final workshop that we ran this fall on a range of different topics. You can find recordings and slides to all of them, and we will make sure all of those materials get shared out. Sincerely appreciate you joining us today for a very dense 90 minutes and for the great questions that we got as well. We know there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We also know that there is a lot of interest and a lot of challenging resources to pursue and projects to activate. So we hope this was helpful in moving your project forward, or at least helping you kind of get your head on straight as you navigate the next phase of your project. The last thing we ask, you guys have been wonderful today. Please use your phone to or click on the survey link that will be in the chat in a second to complete the evaluation form for today's workshop. We'll leave that up for a moment here while you complete that. Just a few questions to help us make sure that we're doing the best programming that we can provide for a range of audiences here. And you guys have been a hell of a dedicated audience. I think we've had like 95% of everyone who started today is still with us. So hopefully that means you are having a good lunch and really enjoying the sound of our voices. If that's not the case, that's what the survey is for. And we do take your feedback to heart, and we make changes every workshop and every year. We ran this cohort last year, this workshop series last year. It was a 3-part workshop series. Now it's a 5-part workshop series at a different length, partly in response to some feedback. So thank you again to everyone who is responding there. The survey link is also in the chat if you prefer to fill it out on your computer. Last but not least, if you have specific questions like Rebecca did or like Luke did, and you want to follow up with me on your energy market, great. Feel free. That's my email right there. If you have questions about what K-State and KSU can offer, Maggie's email is right there. Feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to have just conversations or answer just a more detailed question via email, whatever you would appreciate. And it sounds like based on the survey here, there were a lot of things that people would appreciate. So it's great to see. And really appreciate your engagement today. Slides and recording from today's workshop will be sent out later this week, probably by the end of the week. And everyone who registered for any one of the workshops or more for our entire academy will get a follow-up email in the start of the new year with all of the Brightfields Academy resources that we included: map links, slide decks, recordings, tools and resources that we referenced throughout this. So that'll be your one-stop shop for everything that we covered in this entire Brightfields Academy. Again, cannot thank you enough for the thoughtful engagement today, and to Elisa, Maggie, Tansy, and Jubing for their support and presentations today as well. So with that, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to hear from you if you have questions or are trying to move your project forward in the new year.
Thank you.
Thank you.